Hello and welcome to another episode of Despite the Challenges, a show where we showcase amazing people who, despite their impeding circumstances and challenges they face in their lives, not only they overcome themselves, but they go out in the community and help others. Today, my guest is Tanisha English. Tanisha had suffered with the PCOS, that's Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. At age 25, she was diagnosed, and the journey that took her from that point on to now. Let's hear directly from Tanisha herself. Tanisha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ritu. So like you said, I was diagnosed with Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome at the age of 25. And actually just by happenstance. I had never heard of it before that, and I just happened to be at a doctor's office where the primary physician there was a PCOS specialist.
Okay.
And so because she was there, many of the physicians on staff were more educated about it. They knew to look for it.
Okay.
And so I stayed with this doctor for a couple of years, about 2 years or so, and she was just watching things and hearing my story. And then one day she said to me, "Hey, I want to test you for something." And I said, "Okay." And she did the test and came back and said, "You have polycystic ovarian syndrome."
For our viewers, what does that mean?
Well, after researching it, essentially what that meant was that I had an endocrine disorder that had some symptoms that were hormonally based, but it really is an endocrine disorder.
Okay.
And so what that meant for me is that I was going to be confronting this diagnosis for the rest of my life, that there were going to be some challenges with respect to the life I needed to live, medical conditions that I was at a higher risk for, if I didn't properly manage it. It also meant that, and as a woman, this was most important to me, that I may have some struggles with fertility.
Okay, so that is the most common side effect?
Well, yeah, it is one of the most common symptoms. So some of the common symptoms for women with PCOS, which is one of the things that makes it hard to diagnose because the symptoms show up differently in every woman. And a lot of these clusters of symptoms can look like other things. And so my symptoms were that I had pretty severe acne. My face was breaking out a lot. I had gained quite a bit of weight and was having a really difficult time getting it off. And so I had developed an insulin resistance, which resembles what you see in diabetics.
Yes.
And so what they diagnosed this as is pre-diabetic, which is another term that people aren't very familiar with. So when you tell someone you're pre-diabetic, they're like, there's no such thing. You're either diabetic or you're not.
I heard that quite often. Yes, either you are or you are not. But depending on what your symptoms are, and like you said, the doctor or doctor staff or the network was pretty aware of the syndrome, so it may have worked on your advantage.
It did. Okay. So I was able to, so I had acne, I was struggling with the weight loss, I had insulin resistance, and then they never did test to see whether or not I actually had cysts on my ovaries. People think because it's called polycystic ovarian syndrome that that's one of the things that you have to have, and it's not actually. And fertility is a consequence because we have higher testosterone levels than what is typical in a woman, and so that causes some irregularity with regard to menstruals, and also the release of an egg during your menstrual cycle. Right, ovulation is inconsistent as well. And so those were my symptoms. I was having really irregular menstruals, sometimes 2 to 3 times a month. It was very challenging. And so not long after my diagnosis, because I'm kind of a type A person, I wanted to know everything about it. I never heard about it before. I wanted to know what this all meant, because even in her telling me what the symptoms were and that there was no cure and all of that, I didn't still have a good sense yet of, what does that mean for me and for my life? And so the more I learned about it, instead of feeling, encouraged and, oh, great, I'm going to take this thing on, I completely rejected it. At that time, I was 25 and, I wasn't yet married, but I knew I wanted to be married and I knew I wanted to have children. And so for me, even though every woman with PCOS does not experience issues with fertility, that was the biggest symptom for me that stood out, the one that challenged me the most, because a lot of, who we think we are as women and who we're going to be and our womanhood is wrapped up in our ability to be mothers.
There's a little known about PCOS.
Yes, it's
right?
been around for...
Was it a struggle for you to kind of find more information or studies or reach out to the right kind of medical professional?
Well, luckily for me, I was already with the right kind of medical professional. It was a little bit challenging, not so much to find books. I did eventually, not right away, but eventually find books, because it's been a known diagnosis, I think, for about 55 years.
Okay.
So it's not too new, but one of the biggest challenges was coming to an acceptance in my mind and going out to seek the knowledge. There were, I live in a major city, so there were support groups and things, and I was at a doctor's office that was connected to a support group, but I was not ready to accept the challenges that were going to come with this diagnosis and everything that it meant. I wasn't ready. And so,
in other words, you were in denial.
I was in denial. I was in denial, and I just refused to address it. I refused to do the things that my doctor was telling me. I refused to hear what was still possible. I immediately took on everything that I was going to lose. I immediately took on every struggle that it was going to bring. And so the hope of, even with these symptoms and even with this, you can manage it, you can overcome it, you still, be able to have children. I just completely shut down to that and immediately, targeted in on, but what about me wanting to be a mom? What about that?
I see. So that was a turning point?
Well, no, the turning point, I think, for me, because there was a couple of them. The first turning point was shortly after I got married. Okay. Still in denial, still in resistance. About a month after my husband and I were married, we found out that we were pregnant. And the whole ordeal around that was really traumatic. It was not a joyous occasion or anything like that. I was at the doctor because I noticed that something was just off. And not what I was typically used to, because PCOS had made my body off for a while. So I was used to off, but even more so than that. And so I had said to him, if things aren't better by Monday, I'll go. And so by Monday they weren't, and I went. And the doctor, because they seem to almost always give you a pregnancy test every time you go to the doctor, she came in and she didn't look happy. And it was almost like, well, you're pregnant. What do you mean? And so... from there, she said, you're pregnant, but you have either miscarried already or you're miscarrying. And so she sent me across the street to the hospital to essentially have the pregnancy terminated. But when they tested me, or when we went over there, they said, well, we can't find the baby or whatever, and so you must have passed it, but we'll, draw your blood in a couple of days to see. And so, to make a long story short, over the next 2 weeks, I went to the doctor just about every 3 days, trying to get a definitive answer around whether or not it was going to be a viable pregnancy or not. Because first they told me, I had miscarried, and then I went back to the doctor that first time, and they said, oh no, you're still pregnant. And so we went through that for like 2 weeks. So that was kind of
an agonizing couple of weeks?
Oh, it was a very agonizing couple of weeks. And so, eventually, after one appointment when it seemed like things were looking hopeful, before I could even get out of the parking lot, all of a sudden I was in an extreme amount of pain, and I wound up having to go into the emergency room and then have an emergency surgery to have a ruptured fallopian tube removed.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was challenging.
So, in other words, I have heard of that before, the pregnancy in a fallopian tube.
Right.
So, that's an extremely dangerous situation.
Yes. It's an extremely
I say
dangerous.
that extremely dangerous situation. If you're trying to conceive and have a baby, that is,
even
medically speaking.
Yeah, well, even more than that, the doctor said, it's a good thing we caught it, because that internal bleeding, you could have died. They could have died. And the hard part was that I've always been a woman of faith, never probably as grounded in my faith as I am now, but I've always known about God. I've always believed in God. And even when I first was diagnosed and throughout my denial period, I misused my faith, and I was like, I don't accept this. God is able and all of that. And he is all those things. But there's still, that was only part of it. There was still something I had to do. There is a verse in the Bible that says faith without works is death, and so I needed to do something. And the hiding it and the not sharing it and the not, trying to overcome it and adding my faith onto that and then helping others kept me from being able to overcome. So I remember praying, during this 2-week ordeal before the emergency surgery, praying to God and asking him to make this a viable pregnancy, because I had already knew I had PCOS. I knew it was already a miracle in and of itself that I was able to get pregnant. And, we weren't even trying. It just was something that kind of happened, and I really, really wanted the pregnancy. So I was really angry, when it turned out. And then I left feeling even more discouraged, because now I'm 1 tube down, and it's going to be even more challenging. And I was really, really mad at God, because I was like, why? I want to be a mother. This is, a very strong passion. And so PCOS and now one of my tubes.
So the denial turns to anger,
Yes.
to frustration,
Yes.
to even more. Now you have physical as well as emotional challenge to deal with.
Yep, and the scars that I had to look at every day. I have 2 scars on my abdomen because they weren't sure initially whether they were going to have to take both tubes. And so probably for almost that first year after that, I was just angry. And I kept trying to move in my faith, but deep down under, I was still angry.
Angry at who?
I was angry at God. I was angry at God, and I wanted to trust and believe that, the promise that I felt in my heart that he had made to me, why would you give me such a strong desire to be a mother if you were not going to allow that to happen? And I didn't, I don't think I had enough word in me yet that I was able to resolve that. And so it became very difficult. And, I remember, a friend of ours from church had, who was pregnant at the same time as I was. But her baby, came to be and mine did not. And they wanted me to help plan her baby shower. And I thought I was strong enough to do it. And I did do it. But I remember at some point during that night being in the bathroom, crying, wanting to go home, because I was so connected to exactly how far along she was. That's how far along I would have been. And it was really, really,
Tough.
a challenge. It was really, really a challenge for me. So, that was the one turning point. But there's victory in the story. And, in January of this year, as I continue to, develop in my faith and, continue to, trust and believe in God, even around other things, even though I was still not completely certain yet, how his will, his power would manifest in this situation. My faith was developing in other areas. And so in January, I came to the understanding, I came across the scripture again, that faith without works is dead. And I was listening to a program on the radio, and they were talking about the scripture where they say that, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. And they were saying, in one translation, I think it was a Wellness Wednesday, as a matter of fact, they were saying, in some translations it says self-discipline, which means that anything that you need to do, you can pray and ask God, invite him into that thing, and he will give you the discipline to do what you need to do. So I finally decided, okay, I would finally do what the doctors were asking me to do, take the medicine they were asking me to take, and I would really work to, try to live a healthy, active lifestyle so that I could get my weight down. Because what I came to know about my personal experience is that the more I had my weight under control, the less my symptoms were. So the acne would go down, I would have much more regular menstrual cycles, and I would feel, better, because fatigue was also a symptom that I had, that when I was really, really busy, I wasn't as present to, but when life slowed down a little bit, I was much more present to how frequently I felt fatigued, and also how frequently I felt depressed.
So how long period between your miscarriage and
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So 2 years had been pretty challenging in
Yes.
every aspect.
Yes.
Physical, emotional, spiritual,
Yes, it was it was very, very challenging. Looking back on it now, I don't think I even realized how bad it was, how bad I felt, how, bound, how much in bondage I felt to this thing until I achieved some level of freedom.
You look like you have much more control on your emotions.
Yes.
And I can't see what goes inside, but I think you are in a much better place right now.
Absolutely. I feel freer now than I have ever felt. And so in January, I started, my journey to begin living a healthy, active lifestyle, and it was awesome. I came down like almost 25 pounds, 2 dress size. I was feeling amazing. And yet, I think I thought the weight loss would do it, feeling better would do it. The symptoms came down and that was awesome. But at some level, I was still present to, I hadn't conquered it yet. Emotionally, I hadn't conquered it. I had started the journey from conquering it in my physical body, but I hadn't conquered it yet emotionally.
What was at the top emotionally that you needed to conquer first? Overcoming denial, accepting it?
A little bit. That was part of it. I needed to be able to say, okay, I have this. All right. And now what? It wasn't like, I have it and now I'm going to die. It was like, okay, you have it. Now you need to equip yourself. Right, you have to live with it. So equip yourself with the knowledge, make the choice, make the decision to do the things that will allow you to live a joyous life in spite of. And my faith was going to be a part of that. I just didn't know how that was going to fit in at that point.
So let's come back to the faith. And you said that, throughout your life, it was kind of an anchor for you.
Yes.
And now you had up and a down ride in your faith. Not really ready to accept what was happening to you. What took place?
So after, I started the healthy, active lifestyle journey in January. And then in my birthday in June, I had come down, I had lost weight, still no babies. And pregnant people were popping up all around me. And so being inundated, with childbirth, with pregnancies, with baby showers and things like that, something that wasn't really, really present because I was focused on getting my body ready. And then I felt like, okay, we've made significant progress. This is it. This should happen. And a couple of months went by and nothing happened. And I began to fall back into a depression. I felt better. I looked better, but I was still depressed. There were still some days, where I could feel that emotionally I was still bound, even though from the outside, I definitely had the appearance of freedom. But I wasn't free yet.
So I want to just kind of repeat your words that you felt shame. Of course, there is frustration and other things. The shame of not accepting something was happening to you or being able to talk about it.
The shame, I think, was around a lot. One, PCOS, like I said before I was diagnosed, I had never heard of it. And so most people had never heard of it. And so struggling with something that when people ask you about, you try to tell them about, they don't know about, sometimes you feel or you get the impression that people are kind of just dismissing it. It was almost sometimes like people didn't believe me. Like
they didn't know what to tell you.
Right. There's no such thing as there's no such thing as pre-diabetic and polycystic ovary syndrome. What is that? I never heard of that. What does that mean? And then when you are a young couple and you get married, there is an unspoken expectation that after about a year or so, there should be some babies coming.
So you start your family.
And so when, we've been married 2 years and we still don't have any biological children, and everywhere you go, people are like, can't wait for your babies to come. Oh, when are your babies going to come? Like every time someone sees you, they talk to you about babies. And, you don't have the kind of relationship with everyone where you get into the whole story of, what the hindrances are, but you feel it. And so every time you go places, you're reminded that you don't have any babies yet.
And it becomes very hard to answer to, especially in a casual conversations. Right? And it's emotionally extremely difficult.
It is. It really
so
is.
It's reliving the pain each time someone asks you a very curious and a simple question.
Yes.
Right.
Something that shouldn't produce that much, you answer it and you move on, and it just became, it was hurtful.
So your faith started taking over.
Yes.
So tell us what took place, how it changed your life, and what you had been up to.
So in this, pursuit, I told you I thought that I was trying to find, purpose. I was trying to connect with God another way. I wanted to deepen my faith. I wanted to get present to what was my purpose and start to begin to live that thing. And in devotionals one morning, he brought to my remembrance the story of Paul and the thorn. And so I went to 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10, and I began to read that story. And in those two verses, it says, my grace is sufficient for you. And it talks about the fact that in your weakness, my strength is made perfect. And so then Paul says, so I will gladly boast in my weakness, that your strength might be glorified. And so it just seemed like, it wasn't like it was a story that I'd never heard before. It wasn't like it was a passage of scripture that I had never read before. But something about that day, in the space that I was in and wanting to get to a new place in God and really chasing after that, there was a revelation that I had about it that I never had before. And I wasn't even really thinking about it in relation to PCOS. But that was the immediate revelation I got about it. This is your thorn.
So in that moment, it kind of presented a whole new meaning to you.
Absolutely. It presented a whole new meaning for me. And all of a sudden, in a way that I hadn't been able to get it in like 8 years, I got it.
You got it.
Got it. Just like that. And it was weird because I had said I'd been bound by that. Emotionally and spiritually bound. It was a hindrance to me. And it was like the moment I got it, I was immediately free. Free. And all of a sudden I had this new understanding of it. This is my thorn. And if I want to glorify God, if I want to, allow, create a space where he can use me and he can give me a purpose, I have to be willing to testify about the fact that he is good and he does keep his promises and all of these things. And so it so happened to coincide with September, which is PCOS Awareness Month. And so I made the commitment that I would publicly acknowledge that I was a woman who was living with PCOS and that I would dedicate the month to speaking out about it, to raising awareness, to educating, to empowering other women. And at the time, it was just about trying to do what had been revealed to me, that I needed to do it to honor God. That's what it was about. I needed to do it to honor God.
All right. So let's talk about what it took for you to, when you have the newfound strength now and you acknowledge it and you want to be public and you used your faith to go out, evidently help others.
Yes.
Talk about it.
And so I think social media is really big right now.
Yes.
So September 1st, I found a PCOS awareness picture and I used my Instagram and I wrote a really long message just explaining to people what my journey had been and the revelation I had had that gave me the strength and the courage to be able to say, yes, I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Yes, this is something that is challenging me, and yet I still have hope. And at that point, I don't even think I knew that it would take on the kind of life and the momentum that it really has taken on. I was just so happy
to get
in
it out,
free, and in understanding that the more that I boast about it, the more strength that God will give me to manage and confront it, and the more that he will be glorified. And so that's really where it started. And then it kind of just took on its life. And the more and more I did it, it was like every day, every post, more powerful, more freedom, more powerful, more freedom. And then I became aware that at some point this month, it stopped being so much about me and started being like, this is helping people. This is helping people. This is helping women who had it, didn't know anyone else who had it, didn't knew that they needed to educate themselves. This is helping people feel encouraged, feeling validated. And so it was like every day I will post something. Every day.
Wow.
And so I did. I post facts. I post little tests and questions that you can ask to, discover whether or not it's something you need to be specifically talking to your doctor about, I began to re-educate myself and learn about, I have to manage this thing in a different way, I want to live. And so, women were contacting me and disclosing that they had it. People were contacting me and saying, I answered every question yes to the thing that you posted up. What do I do next? And I was like, you need to go to your doctor and specifically ask them about this, specifically ask them to test you, for this.
Mm-hmm. So you formed Conquering PCOS in Christ.
Yes. And it started off as just a phrase, it just started off as something that was just a declaration to myself. I will conquer this thing, and I will conquer it in Christ. I'll conquer it through my faith. And then
how did faith come back to the same level that you?
Because I, like I said, I'm a woman of faith, and I know, and you can hear it even in the way I speak about it. I can tell you lots of different pieces. Oh, the word says this and the word says that, and I know. But this one stuck with me in such a way that I can tell you exactly where it is. There are not very many scriptures I can say, it's Psalms 47:2. There aren't. I can tell you what it says. The word has been planted in my heart, but I can't. I can go exactly to it. I know what it was.
So
it had a profound impact. It was like an anchor. It was an anchor for me. Okay. Yeah, well, no, maybe it was more like a life preserve.
What else? What's the most important message you would like to share with our viewers?
The most important message I want to share is that, there are over 5 million women in the United States who are impacted by polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's estimated that 1 in 10 women suffers from this. And yet, in the month of September, you've not seen one commercial. You've not been in one store and seen one item that you could purchase to bring awareness. You've not seen anyone raise money. You've not seen a celebrity on TV. You've not seen a sports team, turn their jerseys teal in recognition of the 5 million women just in the United States to have this.
And worldwide numbers would be much larger. And as you mentioned, it's a little known.
Yes.
There's a little awareness about it. What do you see yourself doing?
I think that I'm going to wind up being a strong advocate for PCOS, women who have it, to encourage and empower them that, there's no cure, but that doesn't mean it can't be conquered, and to bring awareness. It is I really am struggling with the fact that, there are so many women who are misdiagnosed or who aren't diagnosed at all, don't know to ask about it. And I feel like that's a problem for 5 million women who are impacted. And I really want to raise awareness. I want to, advocate for research, advocate for people to really do some studies on the medications that they're giving us to treat this. Is this best? Is it producing
get a little bit
outcomes? Better care, better treatment,
or
better awareness, better support, better recognition. It doesn't have the same impact as like a breast cancer or heart disease or something like that. But a woman with PCOS is 4 to 7 times more likely to have heart attacks. She's more likely to have diabetes by the age of 40, more likely to have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, to be, to suffer from obesity, to suffer from depression. So the impact is still large. Not in the same, it's not the same impact, but it is an impact, and women need to be educated.
All right, so we're out of time today. But it was very good to share your story and a whole lot about PCOS. And thank you for coming to the studio and sharing your story with our viewers. And a food for thought. I just wanted to share this quote that comes to mind for Johannes Eaton. Said, "Doctrine and theories are best for weaker moments. In the moments of strength, problems are solved intuitively, as if by themselves." Thank you for joining us. I am host Ritu Chopra. Until next time, bye-bye.